Early results show former Alaska governor and vice presidential candidate Sarah Palin leading Alaska's special U.S. House primary election. There were 48 contenders in this race to finish the term of late Representative Don Young. Palin, who is backed by former President Trump, received 30% of the calculated votes, with Republican businessman Nick Begich in second place with 19%. Santa Claus, yes, that's his real name legally, from the North Pole, which is a town near Fairbanks, made it to sixth place, but only the top four contenders will move on to the special general election, which will take place in August. So for more on this Alaska race, I'm joined by Anchorage Daily news reporter Nathaniel Herz. Nathaniel, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate your time and reporting. So this has been a wild race to follow with 48 contenders, including Sarah Palin. When can we expect the official results?
Not for a while is the short answer. And sorry, thank you for having me here. But so we had an initial count on Saturday night. They counted about 110,000 of 135 or 140,000 ballots that were in the state's possession. Because this was essentially an all-mail election, there were a number of sort of verification steps that they had to do with each ballot that they were doing kind of sequentially as ballots arrived. And so there were 25,000 ballots uncounted as of election night. We expect that there could be as many as 20 or 30,000 more that arrive. Ballots are legit as long as they were postmarked by Saturday, which was election day. So the final count they're saying is going to be June 21st, the summer solstice. And, we should have sort of a certification shortly after that and final results. But it could be all the way up until then, until we know who the top four candidates from this first election will advance into the general or sort of a runoff, which is going to be a ranked choice election, Alaska's first ever.
Yes, and I definitely want to ask about that in a moment. But getting back to kind of this timeline, once we actually get to that point, do you expect a significant shift in the ranks once all these tallies are complete?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, first of all, I think, we've counted about maybe 105, 110,000 ballots with the potential to count maybe 50,000 more. So, anytime you're talking about 50% more ballots, I think anyone that's trying to make this assertion that these results that we have preliminarily are definitive, we're treating that with a lot of skepticism. We also know that sort of the demographics and the types of ballots that have been counted in this first set may not be exactly the same as the demographics of the ballots that come in later. We know that they counted sort of representatively fewer ballots from urban Alaska, from Anchorage, which maybe sort of skewed toward different candidates. So I think we can generally assume it's very unlikely that these top three candidates, who really were sort of set apart from everyone else. So former Governor Palin, businessman Nick Begich, and former U.S. Senate candidate independent Al Gross. We expect that all three of those folks will advance as in the top four to this runoff. But the margins between fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth places are all quite small. Only a few thousand votes, and I think there's definitely some question as to whether those will hold or whether the current fourth place candidate, Democrat Mary Peltola, whether she might be bounced out by one of the candidates who's not too far behind her.
And I do want to ask a little bit about Palin, because, as I mentioned, former President Trump endorsed her. How did that endorsement play in this race? I mean, is that what she can attribute her apparent success at this point to? Kind of how big of a difference did it make?
I mean, that's an ongoing subject of discussion among insiders here in Alaska. And I think, we'd all love to know the answer to that. We don't exactly have a ton of sort of exit polling infrastructure here, so we can only kind of form some impressions based on conversations we've had with voters. I mean, one takeaway I think a lot of folks have been saying here is Sarah Palin almost cuts a larger and bigger profile in Alaska than Donald Trump does. And so it's, she definitely has been stressing her endorsement from President Trump, which came almost as soon as she entered the race. But it's sort of like, did people not know who Sarah Palin was before she got Donald Trump's endorsement? I don't think so. And so, right. I think there is a segment of Republicans who, really appreciate her style and brand of politics, who are conservative, who, I think what's interesting is here in Alaska, there are a lot of Republicans who really were frustrated with Palin for leaving in the middle of her term as governor, and for sort of taking more of a profile on this national stage. But I think what we saw, and so I think there were a lot of questions about how much support would she have among Republicans and among voters in Alaska this time around. And I think what we saw is that there are a lot of voters that maybe don't have as much of like a history in Alaska, who maybe, don't necessarily know her history bouncing between state and national stage. And we're just happy to have a big name to vote for in this election cycle. We know that about half the electorate, half of the voter rolls since she left her position as governor in 2009 is new. And so, kind of hard to know exactly what went into these results. But, those are some of the things we're thinking about and talking about here.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, in 2020, Alaskans voted to implement this ranked choice voting system. How exactly do you think it'll play out here? Is it, can you kind of say who might benefit from that kind of system?
This is a question that we get asked probably on the daily, at least on the weekly at this point. I think it's really too early to know exactly how it's going to play out. And anyone who's really going to make any authoritative predictions on this is probably someone with an agenda, because it's the first time we've ever done it here. It's definitely been tested in different places around the country. I think, there are just some interesting dynamics. So it's not just that we have a ranked choice voting system in the general election with these 4 candidates. It's also that we had a nonpartisan primary with these 48 candidates. And so, right. One of the interesting outcomes is there's not one party nominee. We now have 2 leading Republican candidates running against each other in the general election. That's former Governor Palin and this businessman, Nick Begich, who's a relative newcomer to politics here in Alaska. And, what's really interesting is in the ranked choice voting sort of playbook, theoretically, you would want, if you're a Republican and you want a Republican elected, you would want these 2 Republicans to be playing nice, right? Because anyone that votes for Sarah Palin as a first choice, you would think that they would want someone like Nick Begich, who, probably shares many values with Sarah Palin, that they would rank Nick Begich second, and vice versa, that, someone who would vote Nick Begich first would then rank Palin second. But now you've already got Nick Begich in the very first days after these primary results going really hard after Sarah Palin, because he knows that if he is going to win the election, he needs some of her votes. But, so there's some interesting questions around sort of, is that the right strategy for Republicans overall? Is that the right strategy for Nick Begich if he wants to win, maybe at the expense of a better overall chance for Republicans to win? So there are all these different scenarios that I think people are starting to think through, but we're not totally clear about sort of how they're going to play out or what they mean quite yet.
A lot of questions still remain in this Alaska race, and an interesting Senate race there this term as well. So Nathaniel Herz, we really thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.